What's on your radar, Ryan?
Well, there have been a lot of questions raised the last few days about the latest Project Veritas documents, and I've gotten a bunch of messages from some of the viewers of this show saying that because I'm a liberal, which I'm not, but that's beside the point, we'll get to that later, but because I'm a liberal, I just don't want to believe what Project Veritas has exposed. So now let me first say this about Project Veritas. It should be clear that I disagree with their politics on pretty much every level. And I think they've been guilty at times of going way over the line. Some of their stuff, like their famous acorn sting, relied on taking advantage of low-level workers just trying to help people out who were in need. But all that being said, I always take a look at what they produce and judge it based on its relevance to the public and whether it's substantiated. So let's take a look at this one and see if it holds up. So the first document they have is a letter from Marine Corps Major Joseph Murphy, who served as a fellow at DARPA, which is the military's research center. The other major documents are related to a grant proposal by EcoHealth Alliance for research it hoped to do on bat coronaviruses in its labs in North Carolina and Wuhan. So first, the letter from Murphy. He writes, "You probably saw earlier this week that more official documents linking NIH and EcoHealth Alliance to the Wuhan Institute of Virology were published by The Intercept. I came across additional incriminating documents and produced an analysis shortly after leaving DARPA last month. This report was routed to the DoD IG office," unquote. So, first of all, the idea that I'm involved in some kind of cover-up is difficult to square with the fact that Major Murphy here is citing the reporting of The Intercept, where I'm the DC bureau chief. Many of the documents that have exposed the NIH and EcoHealth Alliance's role in gain-of-function research in Wuhan were only made public because The Intercept sued the NIH to get them. So if you believed the opposite, that we're actually trying to cover up a lab leak hypothesis, you might want to question the quality of your detective work. If you can't get basic things like this right, what are the chances you're going to independently work your way to the right conclusion on something much more complicated than that? Now, for people who are genuinely curious and not just looking to confirm their partisan priors, let's keep going. So much of the rest of the letter includes what Murphy himself acknowledges is his own conjecture, based on the other documents he reviewed, and it's not necessary to go over all of it because we can review the documents themselves. The conjecture includes Murphy's assessment of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, he believes they're curative, and his take on the vaccine, which he's not a fan of. In a previous segment on these documents, I was highly critical of some of his conjectures, and I stand by that criticism. But even if you think that Murphy himself is a crank, and even if you hate Project Veritas, that doesn't mean that the document Murphy leaked isn't authentic or important. Again, his take here on things like the vaccine is roughly as important as yours or mine. But he does say something interesting at the end. He writes, "I presumed that unclassified files would be concealed on a higher network and found them where I expected them to be. I understood what they were and their content, pushed the files off-site, and compiled this report," unquote. So the documents in question were first published by the research group Drastic and also reported on by The Intercept. Murphy's document includes an undated cover letter and also his letter to the Inspector General, which is dated August 13th. Now, the Intercept story he's referring to, in which we published 900 pages of documents related to the NIH's funding of EcoHealth Alliance, was posted on September 6th. He mentions in his letter that our story was published earlier in the week, so that puts him later into September. On September 23rd, we reported on the contents of those documents. The Telegraph in Britain reported on the documents on September 21st and said that a Trump administration official had confirmed their authenticity. So what Project Veritas has added here is a few things. One, they spoke with Murphy, who confirmed the authenticity of his own letter and of the documents, though that's the first full-on, on-record, named confirmation that the documents are authentic. EcoHealth Alliance had not denied their authenticity in the past, and there wasn't much doubt, but this confirmation should put it fully to rest for the public. Okay, so what do those documents say? Here's from the Intercept report written by Sharon Lerner and Maya Hibbett. A grant proposal written by the U.S.-based nonprofit, the EcoHealth Alliance, and submitted in 2018 to the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, provides evidence that the group was working, or at least planning to work, on several risky areas of research. Among the scientific tasks the group described in its proposal, which was rejected by DARPA, was the creation of full-length infectious clones of bat SARS-related coronaviruses and the insertion of a tiny part of the virus known as a, quote, proteolytic cleavage site into bat coronaviruses. Of particular interest was a type of cleavage site able to interact with furin, an enzyme expressed in human cells. Now, you can probably imagine why that's so relevant. Even though the research wasn't funded, that doesn't mean some of it wasn't being done anyway, or they didn't get other funding elsewhere. And it's this potential research that led scientists last fall to say publicly that they were starting to come around to the lab leak theory. Here's Richard Ebright, a molecular biologist at Rutgers University. Quote, the relevance of this is that SARS-CoV-2, the pandemic virus, is the only virus in its entire genus of SARS-related coronaviruses that contains a fully functional cleavage site at the S1-S2 junction. And here is a proposal from the beginning of 2018 proposing explicitly to engineer that sequence at that position in chimeric lab-generated coronaviruses. And here's Martin Mikulski, a director of the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior in Germany, whose work tracking bats and other animals was actually referenced in the grant application without his knowledge. Quote, the information in the proposal certainly changes my thoughts about a possible origin of SARS-CoV-2. In fact, a possible transmission chain is now logically consistent, which it was not before I read the proposal. So these documents are extremely important, and it's important to have on-record confirmation they're authentic. Now, one criticism I have with the Project Veritas report is that it states as fact that the NIH went on to fund this project. That's not exactly right. The NIH was already funding EcoHealth, and there are still questions left to be answered about what exactly they were doing with that funding. But we do know what they wanted to do, and it was the kind of research that could have led directly to this pandemic. And what I'd say to people on the left is don't discount the importance of this DARPA proposal just because Project Veritas reported on it.
Yeah, this is very important stuff, and it should not be dismissed because of the source. Like you, I've been critical of some of James O'Keefe's antics in the past. In particular, what I don't like that they do is those undercover interviews with people who work at CNN or a social media company, where they're like getting drinks with them or something, and they're trying to goad them into saying something about the bias of the company. But you know what? If you recorded me having drinks with some pals, I bet I might badmouth my employers or you or my friends or whatever. Like, it's not, if it's obtained under false premises, then you can't necessarily rely on what people are saying.
I think sometimes the undercover stuff is great. There is a world in which undercover journalism can expose things that no other type of reporting can do. But I think you're totally right that it's also easy to get people to agree to things just because people are social creatures. They're social animals. You're at a bar, someone's like, boy, Trump is really the worst, isn't he?
Yeah.
You could see someone being like, he's definitely the worst. But rather than being like, you know what, why don't I get into an argument about journalism ethics right here at the bar?
Exactly.
And so then you take that shot of the person saying, Trump is the worst, and you're like, CNN thinks Trump is the worst. All you have to do to understand that CNN thinks Trump is the worst is turn on CNN.
Right. I saw O'Keefe, so this is I'm not sure you mentioned him in the radar, but he's the Project Veritas leader. At the 2016 Democratic National Convention, he was there, or there was somebody, and I can't remember, he was either pretending to be a Bernie supporter or pretending to be a Hillary supporter and was fighting with the supporters of the other person. And I saw him being interviewed by this reporter for like a mainstream news outlet, and he said his name was James O'Keefe, and that's when it clicked for me. I'm like, wait, because I know that guy. Like, oh, that's who that is.
Bernie bro, James O'Keefe.
It's like, I caught you, James.
And so Sergeant Murphy, by the way, is...
Anyway, that's a side.
And so he's not the source of the Project Veritas leaks. But when he says he pushed the documents off-site, my read of that is that he's the one who leaked it to Drastic, and there wouldn't be anything wrong, because these are not... They were smuggled into a classified area, which raises questions of a cover-up, and that's another important thing that comes out of this Veritas report. Why were these unclassified documents in a classified shared drive? And why were they put in there right around the time everybody started asking questions about what was going on in Wuhan? Those are real questions that DOD needs to answer. It sounds like what he's saying in that letter, and he might have a different explanation, is that he's the one who then gave them to Drastic, which he would be entitled to do because they're not classified. This is not a situation where he would go to prison for that. We don't know for certain that that's how Drastic got them. Drastic is a research group that posted a ton of documents that The Intercept and other outlets have relied on in the past to get access to these documents. I was critical earlier of his assertions about that it's an American-made, not real vaccine. Like he leaps to a whole ton of conclusions in his memo that he writes to the IG, but you can just discard that whole memo. Like whatever he says to the IG in that letter isn't actually important. What's important is he's pointing the IG to this grant proposal that was buried. So whatever he thinks of it, that's interesting. But who is he? He's a guy who blew the whistle on the fact that this proposal exists, and for that he should be applauded.
Here's a crazy idea. Why don't we not fund research in labs in China to infect and experiment with bats to produce a super virus?
That could lead to 5 million people dying potentially.
Let's just not do that.
How about not?
I say no. I'm a hard no for doing that.
Which is why it's important to talk about this stuff, because then we can decide democratically, and actually the whole world has to decide.
Yes.
Because if one
not Dr. Fauci, but all of us, and I think all of us are pretty clear, we should not do this.
Yes, and also, sorry to get cranky to the viewers, and say whatever you want on Twitter and on YouTube. Like those are the places where I think it is appropriate to lash out at people. Like that's what those places are for. My DMs, my replies, and comments on YouTube. Like, let it fly.
Yeah.
These weirdos are in the inbox, in the Instagram. Like Instagram is for like posting pictures of like snowmen.
Selfies.
Yeah.
For me, it's for selfies.
Just get out of the Instagram. It's rude.
The audio, you can. I'll give you Ryan's address if you DM me privately.
My DMs are open. If you want to like trash me there on Twitter. That's what it's for.
All right. Well, that's where I do all my criticizing.
Exactly.
That's me in the YouTube comments being like, low energy Ryan Grimm hates freedom.
That's totally clean there.
That was me.
Just don't come into the Instagram DMs.
Okay.
That's just weird.
All righty. Well, we'll have more Rising right after this.